This first match we're going to see is the Ultimate Warrior beating Brian Costello in a
Right.
non-title match for the IC. It goes a minute and 36 seconds. And after the match, this is the show or the episode where we see the Ultimate Warrior pick his opponent up and carry him halfway down the aisle and then
Yeah.
just drop his ass like a sack of potatoes.
There you
That's
go.
this particular episode. It was filmed on November 20th,
Uh-huh.
so more than a month prior at Market Square Arena in Indianapolis, Indiana. There's so many iconic moments, including the double Hebner referee. I believe that happened at Market Square Arena. Why do you think Market Square Arena was such a big part of the WWF back in this era?
Hey, it's probably that's one of the things you probably would have to talk to like the building people about. Uh, and because normally it goes, you return to buildings if number one, you get a good deal on the building, and number two, you get a good solid fan support. That would be the reason I would think. Um, and of course, this could, listen, this is a match that that I voiced over in the studios with Lord Alfred Hayes. So this is a match that had already been taped, as you mentioned, and we just revoiced it in the studios. And again, I like how they took the WWF logo and kind of
Well, the reason
put out
they
of
had to blur
focus.
that one in particular, Tony, is
Yeah.
because that banner that hangs in the ceiling says Superstars of Wrestling.
Ah.
Someone else secured that trademark. WWE let it lapse. Someone else secured it.
Wow.
And when WWE tried to make a deal with them, they either asked for too much money and the WWF said fuck off, or
Yeah.
they just didn't want to pay for it at all. So they
Yeah.
do not own the Superstars of Wrestling trademark. And anywhere you see that, they now have to blur it.
Yeah. And that's it's well, there it is right there. Uh it's amazing to me.
Now,
That
notice, Tony, just so you know, that logo I don't believe even existed back then.
okay.
Because that is a modern, I shouldn't say modern, that's a mid-90s WWF logo turned on its side.
Uh-huh.
Like, they weren't turning the logo on the side there
Okay.
in that era.
All right. Yeah, right. That was just straight on. You're exactly right.
So I
Like
think
like
originally it probably said Superstars of Wrestling, but
yeah.
they knew that we couldn't do that, so the actual WWE network just cleaned that up.
Yeah. But anyway, we did a lot of recommentating matches. And so the Warrior. Notice how he man, Jim would blow up in 30 seconds, man.
Yeah, I
Was
mean,
he
he's running to the ring, high
yeah,
intensity,
yeah,
slinging the, belt around his head.
yeah. I'm all for these minute 30 matches.
Oh, man, just throws the belt down on him.
Yeah.
You know, I've heard recently people in wrestling say they don't think enhancement matches have a place in wrestling anymore. What do you
Yeah.
think about that?
Well, that's a good discussion. I'm from the school that they do,
Yeah.
but it's got to be done correctly. And the reason I say that is I don't think, and there's a school of thought here, as a quote unquote star or superstar, if we will, that you can go into a quote unquote squash match and give the person you're wrestling a lot. You've got to look great. You've got to show how tremendous you are. You got to show your moves and your wear and not give that person that much. And if it happens that way, I think they're worth something. Because first of all, you turn on an enhancement match, you know who's going to win, right?
Yes.
I mean, there's no question about who's going to win. However, if you give your opponent some, it's not doing you any good. And that's my thought on that. And I know a lot of people behind the scenes feel the same way. Um, that they sometimes they give their opponents too much, and that comes from in this day and time that comes from spending a lot of time at the independent circuit and not being knowing what squash matches are really all about. I don't think you should do a whole show on them. Back in the day, that's all there were, and it was the promos that you watched the show for. So I think there's a place for them, just not too many.
We're still watching, of course, Prime Time. We hope you'll watch along with us. It's from Christmas Day, 1989, or as they call it on Peacock, it's season 5, episode 52. What we're watching right now is a WWF magazine update.
Mhm.
And when I was a kid, the WWF magazine was such a cool part of my fandom.
Right.
I remember the first thrift store we actually ever went to. I don't know how or why we were there in particular looking for something, but there was something that my mom was trying to make for someone or something, and we went to the first thrift store I remember going to, and there was a whole like box of old WWF magazines from like 87, 88, 89,
Wow.
and it was like, $5 for 100 magazines or something silly. So I asked mom, and she of course said, "Oh yeah, we can do that." So I came home with just a box full of these old magazines, and I had just discovered wrestling in 1988. So to come home with all of these magazines, I was in heaven, man. It was such a big part. And I know in this era, that's another revenue stream. And I know that nobody really consumes magazines anymore. But Tony, when I was a kid, man, going to the grocery store with mom was not any fun until you realized, oh, wait, there's a newsstand filled with wrestling magazines and you can flip to the back and see the rankings. And it was a big part of my fandom. Were the wrestling magazines a big part of your fandom, Tony?
Yeah, but the wrestling magazines that were a big part of my fandom were Pro Wrestling Illustrated, The Wrestler. Um, those were we called them the Bill Apter magazines back then. I subscribed to them. I got them delivered to the house all the time, and that's how back in the day that you would, like, for instance, you would read about Baron von Raschke in Minnesota at the AWA, and then all of a sudden, when you heard Bob Caudle say, fans coming soon to Mid Atlantic Championship Wrestling, Baron von Raschke, you go, holy shit, I've read about him on the magazines. So the magazines were where you read about all the guys in the other territories. This is back in the territory days, the other territories, because, you didn't, everything was on local TV back then. And then when they came your way to your territory, it was big news. So I was big into those magazines, really big into them. And I ordered a lot of stuff in the back of those magazines, like Stratomatic baseball cards and things like that. But yeah, the Bill Apter magazines were a big deal. Do they still have PWI?
They do. Yeah, it's still around. They're still doing the PWI 500, the whole deal.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love this era right here. These promos we're watching. We see the big blue cage with Scary Sherry climbing the cage. We got the Macho King on the left, and of course, Zeus on the right. This is happening because in just 2 short days, we're going to get to see the match, the movie on pay per view. It airs on the 27th. This is the era where they were doing the marketing campaign that says, "Why have a regular Christmas when you can have a no holds barred Christmas?" Of course, that mat that never gets old for me. When Sherry ran down and then tries to duck down and runs across the back, and you can just see her doing it, and then she pops up in front of the cage.
Yeah.
That promo moment right there is my absolute favorite of Miss Sherry Martell. Now there is another one where she's got the cauldron and the smoke. But
Right.
those two, buddy, golly, I just love the Macho King and Queen Sherry. I think they might be the most underrated act in history because when people talk about the Macho Man, Tony, they think about like 85, 86, 87, 88. I like the King version. I
Yeah.
think it's underrated. People just thought it was a silly gimmick, but he pulled it off, man.
Of course he pulled it off because he was one of the best ever at
Yes.
anything. And one of the best ever promos when they said, we're going to make you the Macho King. What did he do? He made it work. He believed in it. And that's again, the Macho Man is, to me, is what I always go back to this when I'm talking to younger wrestlers, and I need to drive home a point about being ready to do your promos and being a professional. I always go back to talking about Randy Savage and how he was to work with in the back and how he arrived early, got dressed in his gimmick, and sat there, would go to lunch in his gimmick or to catering in his gimmick because he didn't know when he would be called on to do his promos.